Hello everyone, welcome to Clariprepp, where concepts meets with the clarity. Have you ever wondered whether humans can actually create life? For thousands of years, people believed that creating life was something only nature could do. But today, science has reached a stage where that question is no longer just philosophical, it has become a scientific challenge. Now, imagine this. Suppose I give you a few non living chemicals in a laboratory and ask you to build something that can eat, grow, copy its DNA, divide it into new cells, and even evolve over time. Would that be possible? Until recently, the answer was no. But recently, scientists have created world first man-made synthetic cell world first man-made synthetic cell that can grow, eat, reproduce, and even evolve. This name is SpudCell, and the scientists who are involved in this discovery, Professor Kate Adamala and her research team, and the place where this discovery happened, the University of Minnesota. This discovery helps us to better understanding of the origin of life, create new medicines, and helps us to solve some of the world's biggest biological problems. Now the question is arising in your mind, why the name spud? The spud is an informal English for potato. Spud is an informal English for potato. Students playfully named it SpudCell because when researcher noticed it under a microscope, this tiny cell actually looked a bit like potato. Looked a bit like potato. That's why and how it got its name Spud. In one line, we can say that SpudCell is world's first completely synthetic cell-like system that perform almost the complete life cycle. But the catch is this: it entirely built from non-living components. So this is about the first synthetic cell, which is spud cell. Now I will try to explain the five hallmarks of life which is performed by spud cell to represent itself as a living being. So the five hallmarks of life performed by spud cell and how it performs all the life cycle functions. Though the first hallmark is it can eat. Now don't imagine this tiny cell opening its mouth and start eating the food. Cells don't work like that. For example, placing a dry sponge in a bucket of water. This sponge doesn't drink water, it simply absorbs it. Similarly, spud cell behaves in almost the same way. It floats inside a specially prepared liquid, and around it are tiny bubbles called liposomes. And these liposomes carrying lipids, sugar, and enzymes. And it is and the spud cell is programmed with custom membrane protein that attracts these feeder bubbles nearby in a molecular soup. Whenever a feeder bubbles touches the spud cell, their membrane fuse and all those nutrients from the molecular soup flow straight in. So that's how it performed its first hallmark of life, that spud cell can eat. Second function is it grow. As it observe these raw materials from feeder liposome, its outer membrane expand and it grows. So the second function, that the spud cell can grow. And the third, which is the most important uh, hallmark, is that it copies its DNA. Now here is something extremely interesting. Living being organism contains DNA, which you all know that. You can think of DNA as an instruction manual. Whenever a cell divides, the new cell also need those instructions. So before division takes place, the DNA must first be copied. And spurred cells successfully perform this task. It copies its own genome, which is only 19 किलो बेस पेयर. अगर हम इसको ह्यूमन जीनोम के साथ कंपेयर करें, which contain 3 billion base pairs. But this tiny genome is enough for the spurred cell to carry out its basic life process. So the third hallmark of the life which is performed by spurred cell is it copies its own DNA. And the fourth is it reproduces without a skeleton. Now it is an interesting thing, because naturally cells usually divide with the help of an internal framework called cytoskeleton. But spud cell does not have this. Scientists design special proteins that helps the cell to split into two new daughter cells. So that's how it performs its reproduction function without a skeleton. And the last but not the least, about the hallmark of life which is performed by spud cell, that it can evolve also. Uh, you have probably heard about the Charles Darwin famous idea of the survival of the fittest. But have you ever wondered, can a completely non-made cell also follow this rule? To find out, scientists perform a simple experiment with the spud cell. Scientists introduce a small genetic change in some spud cell, which made those cells slightly better at observing nutrients. These modified cells observe food faster and and div- uh, food faster and divide faster, and after just 5 generation it outnumber original cells. This follow the idea of the survival for fittest of the Charles Darwin. So these are the 5 hallmarks which is performed by the synthetic cell, that it can eat, it can grow, it copies its own DNA, it reproduce without a skeleton, and it can evolve also. Now we will talk about why this discovery is important. This discovery is not just about making one artificial cell, but it also opens the door to many future possibilities, which helps the scientist. The first possibility is that it helps the scientist to understand how life might have originated on Earth. It is one of the biggest mysteries in science, is that how did life begin on Earth? Nobody witnessed the first living cell. So scientists try to recreate those early conditions inside laboratories. If simple chemical can gradually be assembled into life-like system, something like spud cell, we move one step closer to understanding how life may have originated nearly 3.8 billion years ago. And the second is that these synthetic cells can become tiny biological factories. For example, they may produce life-saving medicines, uh, or even biodegradable plastics that reduce pollutions. And because of these cells, which work at normal biological temperature, they would consume much less energy than traditional factories. So these are the importance of this discovery. But there is one important limitation about the spud cell. Spud cell is not completely independent cell. It can perform many lifelike functions, like it can eat, it can grow, it copies its own DNA, but it still depends on a carefully controlled laboratory environment. For example, it cannot yet manufacture its own ribosomes. It cannot yet manufacture its own ribosome because because of this, scientists still provides ribosome from E. coli bacteria as a source of protein in its nutrient solution to the spud cell, because without proteins no cell can survive. That's why spud cell borrow these ribosomes from E. coli bacteria, which is provided by scientists in its nutrient solution. So although this is a revolutionary achievement, but scientists still have a long journey ahead before creating a fully independent synthetic cell. So before we end, let's revise the five hallmarks in just a few seconds. Like that, it can eat, which means it observes its nutrients, it grows, it can copy its own DNA, it reproduces without a skeleton, and one is it can grow, or it evolves through natural selection also. So with this we are going to end this today lecture. If you enjoyed today explanation and found it helpful, then do share it with your friends. So this is Clariprepp, where we don't just memorize the recent topics, but we understand the science behind them. So thank you for watching. I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you.